woman said, that's plastic rope. She's talking about nature and she's using plastic rope. And for her, which is why I changed my graphic, for her, I lost her at the first slide, right? She couldn't trust that the words I was saying and the images I was using. So I was a little bit paranoid, I have to say. I said this to my husband. I'm like, you don't think that's plastic, do you? He's like, no, it's organic, fair trade, it's all good. So yes, my name is Eva Collins, and I am a management scholar, and I'm going to be talking about the business aspect of urban ecology. I, for a long time, studied and researched in the area of strategies for sustainability for business. And we heard this morning, consolidating your learning right now, we heard this morning how many of us live in an urban context in New Zealand. So if you think about why do we go to cities? Well, we go to cities for jobs, we go for entertainment, for cultural connections. So that's on the positive. On the negative side, globally, cities use 80% of our natural resources, water, energy, and cities aren't just tough on the environment. There was a recent study that looked at teenagers living in polluted air, and they were 70% more likely to suffer mental health issues. So cities have an impact on our environment and on our well-being. So my research has suggested that New Zealand businesses should take a hard look at what they can do for New Zealand's struggling biodiversity. And not just for normative reasons, because they should, but because it makes good business sense. So products ranging from honey to wine rely on strong ecosystems with a sufficient level of biodiversity. When we don't have a healthy environment, forced migrations, conflicts over natural resources, those types of issues are going to impact global commerce more frequently. But I would argue that it's not just for risk mitigation that companies should make nature their business. There's an opportunity here. So in the United States, what they're calling the restoration economy was valued at being worth over 25 billion annually. Another example is we have global competition for talented employees. And cities that have a vibrant naturescape, where nature is all around, are cities where people want to come and work. So I've been researching in this area for a while now, and I will share the bad news first. I've talked to lots of companies about urban ecology and biodiversity more generally, and what I'll tell you, big picture, is that for most companies, it's not on their radar. It's not something that they think about. It's not something that they, and I was listening to some of the examples that were used today, even examples of partnerships, and you didn't hear much about business in those examples. And so how do we get business to engage more in nature and cities? Well, for really tricky problems like biodiversity, partnerships. Partnerships are cross-sector partnerships, are partnerships with business, government, and society. And the UN thought that partnerships were so important that they put them at number 17 in one of the Sustainable Development Goals, because we're not going to get from 1 to 16 unless we work on number 17. So my research is focused on how to structure and implement effective cross-sector partnerships for urban ecological outcomes. And what I'll say also, as well as my team and I have been interviewing people across the country about partnerships. So interviewing partners, not just business, but government and society partners as well, and talking about partnerships that have worked and partnerships that haven't worked, and why is this one successful and this one not successful? So one of the case studies is Zealandia. We've talked about Zealandia a couple of times this morning, but for those of you not familiar with it, it's an eco-sanctuary just 3 kilometers outside of Wellington. And it has a pest-proof fence around it that was mentioned this morning as well. And nature just spills out from the fence. And so I took this picture from the Zealandia Twitter feed. There's a TUI for Twitter. I won't do that again. And this is a picture of a TUI in a downtown Wellington parking lot. But the Zealandia effect is not just this. One of Zealandia's researchers, Dr. Danielle Shanahan, who we interviewed, does what we've heard about today too, that connection between nature and well-being. And what she found is that when people go out into nature, it lowers high blood pressure, reduces stress. You're nodding your head. I know, it's intuitive, right? And when you put that picture up of the kid under the truck, like, love it. And also helps make communities feel more connected. So lots of good outcomes. Bringing it back to the business sphere again, one of Zealandia's partnerships is with Meridian to provide electric shuttles for free from downtown Wellington to Zealandia. And Paul Atkins, the gentleman on my right, is the CEO of Zealandia. I just want to, this is a fun example of some of the framing. So Paul, again, CEO of Zealandia, he describes partnerships this way, quote, "It's important that we apply our imaginations to what we would like to see in the long term. And that is a process of imagination, not management. We need to imagine what a world might look like." So we also interviewed the chief marketing officer for Meridian, not in this picture, Michael Healy, and he uses quite different language. So he said his criteria of who to partner with is that they must be relevant in order to amplify their core values. They must have reach and influence, and they must bring return. So Paul in his imagining wasn't talking about return. And it is one of the challenges about cross-sector partnerships because, and I don't use that quote to be critical of Michael or Meridian. They're a business, of course they're going to want a financial return from their investment. But it is one of the challenges that have to be negotiated in these partnerships. So there's a partnership continuum, and the most common types of partnerships is what I call transactional partnerships. And a good example of that is sponsorship. It's most often one organization giving another organization most often money, but it could be time, it could be people to help them on their way. Another type of partnership is called integrative partnerships. An example of that would be an industry group coming together to agree on voluntary sustainability practices. That would be an example. The least common, but one of the things I'm really interested in finding out about, is about scale and impact. How do we have these partnerships have scale and impact? The transformative partnerships are the less common, but also the ones that have the scale and impact. And that's where that 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3. That what happens when you come together is something that couldn't happen if you were working on your own. And some of the characteristics of what makes a partnership transformative rather than transactional is co-creation. Co-creation from the problem definition to co-delivery of the actions to solve that problem. So from start to finish. So if we can have scale and impact, I'm at the room again, yep, cool. If we can have scale and impact, why don't we do these things more often? And the reason is because they're hard. And the 3, I have a list of why these are hard, but the top 3 of why partnerships are hard. One is trust. I'm going to give you a personal example, but it's personal, but I do believe it's relevant. Before I immigrated to this country, I worked for a large corporation for 10 years, and I worked on environmental issues. I'm married to a man who at that time worked for a not-for-profit environmental organization. And I would go to his parties, and they would look at me like, I don't believe you really care about the environment, because you're not only working for business, you're working for big business. That's, even though I had the whole past of my husband right there, the starting place was tremendous distrust. Coming from big business, you don't want anything to do with the environment. So that is definitely a challenge in these things. And look, at that talk a couple weeks ago, I lost the woman right from my first slide, right? So you can get trust and lose it. And so this is a dynamic situation. Number two is language. So now I'm an academic, and those same business people, they say to me, academics, they don't talk about the real world. And I'm a little offended by that. I query that. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, the theories that you use have nothing to do with our real business world, which I would strongly disagree with. But it's a way, and we saw that in my example of Paul and Michael from Meridian and Zealandia, that the language and how they frame that is quite different. So not an impossible hurdle, but one of the challenges. And the third one is metrics for success. So relationships take energy and resources over a long period of time. And that doesn't necessarily fit in with, particularly from the business perspective, the typical business cycle. And so those are the top three challenges, but don't give up. Partnerships are hard, but they're not impossible. One of the people that we interviewed is the head of Sustainable Business Council, Abby Reynolds. And Abby at Sustainable Business Council has been in lots of different kinds of partnerships, and I've adopted her mantra, which is you have to go slow to go fast. And what she means by that is that you have to take that time up front. You have to do the obvious stuff like get to know each other. Are the right people at the table? Are we all in agreement about where we're going? But also about setting evaluation criteria. I just interviewed this cross-sector partnership last week, and they're doing awesome stuff about urban ecological restoration. And I asked about, what are your evaluation criteria? How do you know that this partnership is a success? And I was told, it's a success because we came together and we know where we're going. And we're not going to burden the partnership by evaluation criteria. We're kind of open to how we get there. And that is one way to do it. It's not the way I would recommend. It's not the way that the more successful ones have gone, but it is certainly one way to do it. This is my last slide. So the final bit of some of our research that I want to share, what came out unexpectedly in these interviews is that I've been thinking a lot about who needs to be at the table, how many partners are too many, those kind of structural issues. And what people have said is what's important is not just the organization, but who is representing that organization. Critically important. Critically important is that person at the table, do they have the organizational mandate to make the decisions? Or are you here and then they need to go back to the organization for authority to make decisions? Even more importantly and more rare is the skill set involved. And if you think of it instead of IQ, it's empathetic quotient. Are you able to see another person's perspective? What's constraining them? What's motivating them to help find areas of common ground? And that turns out that individual skill set is very, very rare and very valued in the partnership setting. So that is the briefest of overviews, because I'm at time. It does go very fast up here. Here's my contact details. If you have any questions or want to get into contact, I'm happy to talk to you. Thanks.